Jessica Thompson thought she had the perfect life, until the day she woke up in an ICU bed, battling for her life, while her husband, Henry, was already preparing a future with someone else. What no one knew was that as Jessica's body fought to survive, Henry was planning her end, setting the stage for a shocking betrayal that would change everything. Jessica Thompson had always been a picture of health. At 35, she was active and vibrant, running marathons, volunteering at her kids' school, and balancing a busy life with her husband, Henry. The couple had been married for over 10 years, and though they had faced their ups and downs like any relationship, they seemed to have it all together. Henry, a successful financial advisor, had always supported Jessica's endeavors, and they made time for each other amidst the busyness of family life. Their home was warm, inviting, and the type of place where neighbors stopped by for coffee. Life was simple, yet fulfilling. Then, one quiet Wednesday afternoon, everything changed. It started as a normal day, Jessica making lunch, Henry working from home, their children, Noah and Lily, running around the backyard. But suddenly, Jessica felt dizzy, her vision blurred. She stumbled into the kitchen, feeling as if the ground was slipping away beneath her feet. Henry was by her side in an instant, his calm demeanor masking the panic brewing inside him. By the time they reached the hospital, things had worsened. Jessica's symptoms escalated quickly, and she was rushed to the ICU. Doctors worked frantically to stabilize her, but they couldn't pinpoint what was wrong. She was deteriorating fast, her body slipping into a state that no one could explain. Henry, although terrified, was steadfast. He stayed by her side, waiting for any hint of improvement, holding her hand as she fell deeper into unconsciousness. The diagnosis came after days of testing: sepsis, a rare and aggressive infection that attacked the organs. The doctors were blunt. Jessica's chances of survival were slim. The disease was rapidly shutting down her vital organs, and even the most advanced treatment seemed ineffective. Henry kept his composure as much as he could, telling the doctors to do everything in their power to save her. But behind his calm exterior, something else was brewing, something no one could see. While his wife lay unconscious, drifting in and out of life, Henry wasn't where you'd expect him to be. He wasn't praying for her recovery or holding on to hope for a miracle. No, Henry was planning. He was making phone calls, sending text messages, and preparing for what was to come. In the cold, quiet hours of the night, while Jessica's body fought for survival, Henry was doing something unimaginable. He was preparing a room for his mistress, Claire. Henry had been having an affair for nearly a year, a secret he had kept from Jessica with calculated precision. Claire was younger, full of energy, and offered Henry the excitement and passion that had seemed to fade from his marriage over time. It was supposed to be a temporary escape, a brief indulgence. But as the months passed, the affair became something more. Henry had started imagining a life with Claire. He had started planning a future without Jessica. As the days turned into weeks, Jessica's condition worsened and Henry's plans became more urgent. He arranged for Claire to move into the hospital's isolated wing, a part of the building rarely used by patients or staff. With Jessica on the brink of death, Henry was preparing a life with someone else. His wife's suffering wasn't a tragedy to him. It was an opportunity. And as Jessica lay unconscious, unaware of the man she thought she knew, Henry's secret world was ready to collide with his reality in the most shocking of ways. As Jessica's condition continued to worsen, Henry's double life became more apparent. What everyone else saw was a devoted husband sitting by his wife's side, patiently waiting for any sign of improvement. The hospital staff, the friends who visited, even their children who were told to stay home out of concern for their mother's fragile state. Everyone believed Henry was exactly who he seemed to be. A loving spouse devastated by the sudden mysterious illness of the woman he had built his life with. But behind the closed doors of the ICU, Henry's thoughts were far from Jessica's recovery. During the day, he played the part well. He would sit by Jessica's bedside, pretending to read to her or hold her hand as she drifted in and out of consciousness. But when night fell and the lights dimmed in the hospital, Henry transformed into someone else. He would slip out of the room and into the empty hallways, making his way to an unused section of the hospital where he had arranged for Claire to stay. Claire, a 28-year-old woman with striking features and an air of youthful confidence, was everything Jessica wasn't at that moment. While Jessica fought for her life, Claire represented an escape, a fresh start, a new chapter. They met at work nearly a year earlier. At first it had been harmless flirtation during the occasional office lunch break. Henry had convinced himself that it was just a distraction, a way to unwind from the stresses of work and family life. But what started as innocent conversation quickly escalated into secret meetings and passionate encounters. Claire, for her part, seemed to embrace the affair with the same fervor. She found Henry to be charming, intelligent, and a world apart from the mundane men she had known before. What Henry never told Claire was how serious the affair had become, how much he had begun to rely on her presence to fill the void in his life. He was no longer satisfied with their stolen moments. He had begun fantasizing about a future with Claire, one where Jessica would no longer be part of the picture. He had started making plans, carefully calculated plans to ensure that when Jessica's condition took a turn for the worse, he would be ready. By the time Jessica's health began its sharp decline, Henry had already arranged for Claire to move into the secluded area of the hospital. It was a wing that had been abandoned for years, a part of the building that was rarely used and had been kept off limits to visitors. Henry had connections, and through those connections he made sure Claire could stay there undisturbed. The room, located at the end of a long hallway, was plain and sterile, but to Henry, it was the beginning of a new life. A new life with Claire. For Claire, the situation seemed odd at first. She wasn't completely aware of just how serious Jessica's condition was. Henry had downplayed it, insisting that Jessica was going to recover any day now. Still, Claire was eager to be there for Henry, to offer him the support he needed while his wife remained in critical condition. She wasn't thinking about what this all meant in the grand scheme of things. She was just focused on Henry. He had promised her that everything would be okay. He had assured her that they would be together, that soon they would build a life of their own. As Jessica's body slowly shut down, Henry's focus shifted. While doctors worked around the clock trying to keep her alive, Henry was more concerned with the details of the future he was about to build with Claire. The room was ready, and soon, Claire would be with him full-time. He had already begun to think about the logistics, how he would manage the funeral arrangements, how quickly he could get everything in order to move forward with Claire. It wasn't that he had no emotions for Jessica. He did, but the love he once had for her had been replaced with resentment and guilt. He couldn't bring himself to be the man she thought he was, the man who would stay by her side during her final days. As Jessica's chances of survival grew slimmer, Henry felt a cold sense of relief. The hardest part was almost over. He had prepared for this moment. He had made the arrangements. He had built the foundation for the life he would live without Jessica. His mind was already thinking beyond the grief, already planning what was next. In the sterile, quiet room at the hospital, Claire waited, completely unaware of the twisted plans Henry had in store. For her, everything seemed just as Henry had promised, a fresh start with the man she was falling for. But unbeknownst to them both, Jessica was still fighting. Despite the bleak prognosis, her body held on in ways no one could have predicted. The days in the ICU dragged on, each one feeling like an eternity for Jessica. Her body, battered and weakened by the sepsis, was slowly deteriorating, but there was a strange determination behind her fading pulse. Even when the doctors had given up hope, when they spoke in hushed tones about the inevitable, Jessica wasn't ready to let go. Her body clung to life in a way that seemed almost unnatural, her resilience defying the odds stacked against her. Her family and the hospital staff were stunned by her strength. But while Jessica fought in silence, her husband, Henry, remained distant. In the sterile confines of the ICU, Henry's outward appearance was one of worry and concern. He would visit her during the day, his face a mask of grief as he pretended to hold vigil by her side. He would sit for hours, looking at her through the glass of the intensive care unit, his eyes glazed with the weight of a man deeply torn. But this image was nothing more than a performance, an act for everyone who came to visit and offered sympathy. In truth, Henry's mind was elsewhere, far away from his wife's fragile state. By night, when the hospital became quiet, Henry would slip out unnoticed, retreating to the shadows where his secret life flourished. It was during these long nights that Henry began preparing the life he would soon lead with Claire. While his wife's body lay motionless in the ICU, her organs shutting down one by one, Henry found himself consumed with thoughts of Claire, their future, and the life that was about to begin. He had already arranged for Claire to stay in a secluded part of the hospital, a room he had set up in advance fully equipped with everything she would need for her stay. Claire, for her part, was under the impression that she was there simply to offer emotional support to Henry during Jessica's final days. She didn't know the extent of his plans. Henry had carefully ensured that she wouldn't see the truth, that she wouldn't recognize the cold efficiency with which he was pushing forward. To Claire, this was just another step in their journey together. She had no idea that she was stepping into a future that had been carved out at the expense of another life. As Jessica's condition continued to decline, Henry grew more impatient. His thoughts were no longer with his wife, whose body seemed to be failing her more each day. Instead, he spent his time obsessing over Claire. He would text her constantly, checking in on her, planning their days together once Jessica was gone. He talked about the house they would buy, the trips they would take, and the future he was building with her. All the while, he continued to visit Jessica, playing the role of the grieving husband, but his mind was no longer with her. His heart had already shifted. Henry's actions were becoming bolder. He had already begun discussing funeral arrangements with a local director, making sure that everything would be in place for when the inevitable happened. He was meticulous about every detail, as if he had been preparing for this moment for months, even years. His plans were set in stone. He saw his wife's death not as a tragedy, but as an opportunity to finally break free from the life he felt trapped in and start fresh with Claire. What Henry didn't expect, however, was the startling turn of events that was about to unfold. As the hospital staff monitored Jessica's vitals, they began to notice something strange. Despite the grim prognosis, Jessica was holding on. Her heart rate, which had been dangerously low for days, started to stabilize. Her temperature, which had spiked uncontrollably, began to drop. The doctors were baffled. This was not the trajectory they had predicted. It was a miracle, but one that no one saw coming. Jessica was fighting back. While Henry plotted for her death, her body was preparing for the fight of its life. With each passing hour, her chances of survival grew stronger. The doctors could not explain it. It wasn't supposed to happen, but Jessica was proving them wrong. As Henry focused on his plans for Claire, he remained unaware of the incredible strength his wife was beginning to show. It was a strength that would soon force him to confront the lies, the deceit, and the future he had so carefully constructed. What Henry didn't know was that the situation was far from over. Jessica was about to wake up from her unconscious state, and the consequences of his actions would soon come crashing down around him. The life he thought he could build without her was on the brink of unraveling, and he wouldn't be able to control the aftermath. The shift in Jessica's condition was nothing short of miraculous. What had seemed like a slow, inevitable march toward death had suddenly turned into something else, something that no one, not even the doctors, could explain. After days of being on the brink of life and death, her body fought back, inch by inch, as if something inside her refused to succumb. Jessica had been unconscious for nearly 2 weeks, but now, in the cold, quiet room of the ICU, her heart began to beat stronger, her vitals slowly stabilizing. At first, no one noticed. The doctors had all but given up on her survival, instead focusing on palliative care. They had already discussed the inevitable outcome with Henry, who seemed to accept the news with a quiet stoicism. But as Jessica's body made a stunning recovery, the medical team became frantic. The nurses noticed her blood pressure steadily rising, the once failing organs slowly gaining strength. The doctors rushed to her bedside, unsure of what they were seeing. Jessica, though still weak and confused, was beginning to regain consciousness. Her eyes fluttered open, taking in the sterile white walls around her, the machines beeping in the background. Her first instinct was to move, but the pain was overwhelming. She couldn't fully comprehend what had happened to her body, or how long she had been lying there, fighting for her life. All she knew was that her mind was clouded with fragments of images, voices, and an overwhelming sense of loss. It wasn't until the nurses told her that she had been in a coma for over a week that the true weight of the situation hit her. What she didn't know yet was the far more chilling reality that Henry had already begun to prepare for a life without her. While she had been unconscious, unaware of the battles her body had been fighting, her husband had been quietly arranging things behind the scenes. He had been making plans with Claire, setting up a room for her in a secluded part of the hospital, preparing for the day Jessica would no longer be there to stand in the way. When Jessica finally found the strength to sit up in her bed, the reality of her situation began to set in. She wasn't just battling an illness. She was battling the man she had trusted with her life, the man she had believed would always be there for her no matter the odds. But something was wrong. There was a tension in the air, something Jessica couldn't place at first. Henry, usually so attentive, had started to act strangely distant. His visits became less frequent. When he did come, he seemed distracted, his attention constantly drifting. He would often leave her room early, promising to return soon, but he never stayed as long as she needed. It wasn't just his behavior that began to raise red flags. Jessica had always been a highly observant person. Even in her weakened state, she couldn't ignore the strange feeling that something wasn't right. She started noticing odd details, the occasional whispered conversation in the hallway, the strange way Henry seemed to be avoiding her questions. Something felt off. She wasn't sure what it was, but she knew that she had to figure it out. As the days passed, Jessica's strength began to return, slowly but steadily. But it wasn't just her body that was recovering. Her mind, once clouded by the sepsis, began to clear. It was during one of these moments of clarity that she remembered the strange texts she had received while unconscious. At first they seemed like the ramblings of a worried friend, but as she reread them in her mind, a sense of dread crept in. The messages had hinted at something more, something far darker than she could have imagined. She hadn't understood their meaning before. But now, in the quiet of her hospital room, the truth began to sink in. Henry wasn't just waiting for her to get better. He was preparing for her to die. Determined to get to the bottom of what was happening, Jessica began to investigate. She knew that her recovery, while remarkable, was just the beginning of something much more complicated. She had to find out what Henry was hiding, what plans he had made for a life that didn't include her. With each passing day, Jessica pieced together the fragments of her suspicions until she finally had a clear picture of the betrayal that had been unfolding right under her nose. What followed was a realization that sent a chill through her already fragile body. As Jessica fought to regain her health, Henry was fighting to move on, to build a new life with someone else. The man she had loved, the man she had trusted with everything, had been plotting her demise while she lay helpless in that ICU bed. The room that Henry had prepared for Claire was no longer just a symbol of infidelity. It was a chilling reminder of how far he had gone to erase her from his life. The truth had finally surfaced, and it was worse than anything Jessica could have imagined. She wasn't just fighting for her life. She was fighting for her dignity, for her family, and for the future she thought she had once shared with Henry. Jessica's mind raced as she processed the horrifying realization of Henry's betrayal. The thought of it was unbearable. He had been so close, playing the role of the loving husband, while in reality, he was already planning a future without her. She had spent days in that ICU, not knowing that her own husband had already started arranging everything for Claire, a woman he had been seeing behind her back. But now, her body was healing, and her mind was clearing. She was far from the woman she had been before the illness, but she was determined. She was no longer just fighting for survival. She was fighting for her dignity and her family. With each passing day, Jessica grew stronger. The doctors marveled at her recovery, which had become nothing short of miraculous. Her body had endured a near-fatal assault, but she was on the mend, regaining strength in ways that no one, including the medical team, had anticipated. Despite the overwhelming physical toll, her emotional strength was growing even more. She felt the fury building inside her, but also a quiet sense of resolve. She wasn't going to let Henry get away with this. Once Jessica was moved from the ICU to a regular hospital room, she began to take action. She needed to know exactly what had been going on behind her back, and she would not let Henry get away with this betrayal. As she recovered, she gathered every piece of information she could, sifting through her phone, her personal belongings, and most importantly, the details of Henry's behavior. There was no longer any room for denial. She had to confront him. One evening, after another short visit from Henry, Jessica decided it was time. He had come by earlier that day, his face etched with worry, but she knew better now. His worry wasn't for her, it was for himself, for what was coming next. Jessica sat in her hospital bed, steeling herself. The walls of the sterile room felt cold and suffocating, but it wasn't the hospital she was worried about. It was Henry and the life she had once trusted him to share with her. Henry arrived late that night just like he always did. His movements were quiet, cautious, almost as if he knew the storm that was about to unfold. When he walked into her room, his eyes immediately fell to the floor, a guilty look passing over his face before he forced a smile. He tried to act as though everything was normal, but Jessica wasn't having it. She was done pretending. Without a word, Jessica reached for her phone. She had compiled the texts, the emails, and the evidence she had uncovered. There was no denying it now. She showed him the messages that had been exchanged between him and Claire, the hotel bookings, the plans for a future without her. It was all there, in black and white. Henry's face went pale as he realized what was happening. His hands trembled as he tried to explain, but Jessica wasn't listening anymore. Her voice, steady but cold, cut through the room. "I know everything, Henry," she said, "about you and Claire, about what you've been doing while I've been fighting for my life." The words stung, but there was something empowering about saying them aloud. Henry stumbled over his words, trying to justify his actions. He talked about how unhappy he had been, how Jessica's illness had forced him to confront his own desires and needs. But it all sounded empty, like a hollow excuse for the months of deception and betrayal. Jessica didn't want to hear his excuses. "You thought I wouldn't make it, didn't you?" Jessica asked, her voice icy now. "You thought you could just replace me, that I wouldn't survive long enough to find out. Well, I did survive, and now I know everything." The realization hit him like a physical blow. His carefully constructed world was unraveling before his eyes. The life he had been building with Claire, the plans he had made to walk away from his family, it was all slipping through his fingers. Jessica didn't wait for him to respond. She knew there was nothing he could say that would undo the pain, the betrayal, the lies. As he stood there speechless and defeated, Jessica felt a rush of clarity. She had been living in the shadows of his deceit, but now she was free. She wasn't just alive. She was reclaiming her life. Her strength had been restored, not just physically, but emotionally as well. She knew that she couldn't stay in a marriage built on lies and betrayal. The future she had imagined with Henry was gone, and she wasn't going to waste another second on someone who had already made his choice. The last shred of hope she had once held for their relationship evaporated in that moment. There was no turning back. Jessica didn't need Henry's apologies or explanations. What she needed was to rebuild, to focus on herself and her children, and to find peace in the truth. She could now face whatever came next, knowing that her survival had been more than just a fight against illness. It had been a fight for herself, for her family, and for the future she would no longer allow someone like Henry to destroy. With a final glance at Henry, she knew that she was done. The man who had once been her everything had shown her exactly who he was. And now she was free to live a life of her own, no longer chained to the deceit and darkness that had threatened to take everything away from her.